Well, hey everybody, this is January 5th, and in our readings, we read more about Abraham and the trouble that he gets himself into. This story with Abraham reminds us a little bit of a soap opera. In one episode, yesterday we found him a triumphant man of faith, and today we find him getting in all kinds of trouble, and he fathers an illegitimate child, and he's squabbling with his wife, and he's just in a whole heap of trouble. So, I found it interesting that the reading starts out with God's reassurance to him not to be afraid. Did you notice that? Now, if God said that, Abraham must have felt fear and he must have been afraid. And isn't that true of many times in our lives? We feel afraid of our circumstances, and it seems like God here is reassuring Abraham that that is just simply unnecessary. So we see that the Lord is giving Abraham a covenant. He's making a covenant with him. And it says that Abraham believed, literally believed in the Lord, and God credited it to him as righteousness. That statement, God credited it to him as righteousness, can be found 3 times in the New Testament. It is in Romans 4:3, in Galatians 3:6, and in James 2:23. This is just a foundational truth of our faith. And it shows us that righteousness is imparted to us in response for our faith. We see here that God has specified the geographical boundaries of Israel's land and told them from the river of Egypt, it's not the Nile, it's a wadi actually, to the great river, the Euphrates. And Israel today, to this point in history, has never occupied this entire bit of land, but they will when Messiah comes, when Jesus comes again after his second coming. We see here that Ishmael is born, actually Abraham's firstborn, but is not the child of Abraham and Sarah. So you see in the legal aspect of that day, it was very appropriate for Sarah to give her handmaid to Abraham to father a child. That was his actually adopting this son as an heir, and it was very common in that time. The bottom line, though, of that story is that Sarah had heard the promise. She knew God had said that he would give them a son, and she didn't wait. She didn't wait on God. Why is it that our heart prefers anything to an attitude of waiting? I wonder. We see here in Genesis 16:7, the angel of the Lord. This is the first time the angel of the Lord is introduced to us, not the last. And many think this is actually Jesus, the angel of the Lord, Jesus. Here again, he shows himself in the Old Testament. In this interchange, God hears the distress of what is her name? Good gracious, I can't even remember. Come on, somebody tell me. The handmaid. You know what her name is. Hagar. Good gracious, I couldn't even remember it. God hears the distress of Hagar and the affliction, and she says, El Roi. Did you notice that? One of the names of God, El Roi, means God sees. She names Ishmael. Ishmael actually means God hears. When Abraham heard that, he would have known that that name meant God hear. What a sting that would have been to him. God hears my plight. Ooh, ouch. Here we see God portrayed as a defender of the helpless. Defender, we'll learn later, he's a defender of the widows. He defends anyone, he defends the underdog. And he sees this family, Ishmael and Hagar, in their need, and he comes to their rescue. Then, in Genesis 17:9, it says, Then God said to Abraham. Now, you got to watch out for these words, then. Then doesn't mean right then. When I was younger and used to read this, I would say, well, gosh, that means right then. Then this happened. No, this word then actually means 13 years later then. So God says to Abraham, your responsibility is to obey the terms of the covenant. You and all your descendants have this continual responsibility. Wow. And as a sign of the covenant, you and all your male descendants will be circumcised on the 8th day. And that's the origin of circumcision. That was the reason for it. It was a sign of the covenant between Abraham and his descendants, that God was their God and they were his people. So it's interesting to note that in this promise of Isaac, Isaac is the natural born son to Abraham and Sarah. And God says, I will give you a son, and it will be Isaac. And he comes many years later after Ishmael. Ishmael's already a teenager by the time Isaac's born. And it just shows us that despite man's doings and plans and actions, God's will not be thwarted. God is sovereign, and his plans cannot be changed. So here we have the origin of the conflict that we see today in the Middle East. All of the Palestinian descendants have come from Ishmael, and the Jewish people are descendants of Isaac. When we were in the Holy Land a few years ago, it became very apparent to us that we went to the Dome of the Rock where the Temple Mount is, and the Palestinians believe that Abraham almost sacrificed Ishmael on the rock. But the Bible teaches us, and we'll read that as we stay tuned, that Abraham almost sacrifices Isaac on this particular rock on Mount Moriah, which is where the Temple Mount exists today. So the source of the conflict in the Middle East of these two warring nations comes from Sarah's decision not to wait on God, and Sarah's decision to take matters into her own hands. Wow, what a lesson for us. How many times do we take matters into our own hands? All the time. But do we really understand the consequences that come from failing to wait on God and failing to be obedient and letting God work out his plan in his timing? So what a lesson here for us. The question is, can we be a people of faith, able to wait on God's timing? So as we conclude this lesson today, I'm going to invite you to post a comment, which can be found on the website right below this video, and share a time in your life where you, like Abraham, waited for a really long time for God to answer one of your prayers. And what did you learn during those years or days or however long it was that you waited on God? Thanks for sharing. See you tomorrow. Shalom.